But really, Alex will touch on the status of the Core Carbon Principles program, those findings from the survey that we did, and then we'll get insights from our practitioners that I just mentioned, Matthew, Joe, and Thomas. And then again, we'll conclude with a robust conversation and questions from the audience. So with that, I will pass it to Alex.
One of the major themes that we explored in our 2025 State of the Voluntary Carbon Market report was the ongoing evolution of the voluntary carbon market with respect to quality and integrity. And one of the most important initiatives around quality and integrity has been the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market's Core Carbon Principles program, which was established in 2023, and in 2024 began to approve individual project methodologies for those credits to be accepted under the Core Carbon Principles. So this is a really innovative program because when a standard is approved for the program and a methodology within that standard is approved, credits that fall under those criteria are automatically considered to be part of the Core Carbon Principles. This is meant to be easy to understand and bring this dimension of integrity to the broader carbon market. As of right now, there have been 8 project categories that have been approved. The first 3, landfill gas, ozone depleting substance destructive, and fugitive emissions, representing the credits that were available in 2024. Then there's been the REDD+ and afforestation, reforestation, revegetation categories, which will be the focus of this webinar on nature-based solutions. And then earlier this year, the cook stoves and biodigesters categories were approved, as well as nitric acid abatement from adipic acid production, which is an industrial process category. Even since the publication of our report in May, ICBCM has been adding new methodologies at the start of their assessment process, including additional afforestation, reforestation methodologies, waste disposal and methane abatement, and carbon dioxide removal methodologies like direct air capture, biomass burial, and sequestration. We're also still awaiting final results from assessments that have already been initiated on improved forest management, sustainable agriculture, and biochar methodologies. So within Core Carbon Principles, there's 2 types of nature-based solutions that have been approved, and several different methodologies within these 2 types. So the first is REDD+. This is reduced emissions from deforestation and degradation. And there's been 1 project-based methodology approved and 2 jurisdictional REDD+ methodologies that have been approved. Those jurisdictional methodologies being the ART-TREES methodology for non-high forest, low deforestation, and the Vera's the jurisdictional nested REDD framework. For project-based REDD+, the VM48 methodology from Vera has been approved. However, projects have not transitioned over or been established under this methodology yet, because data that's key for this has to be provided by Vera. And we'll have Carbon Tanzania speaking directly to this experience later in the webinar. This is the largest project type within the voluntary carbon market. Over the last 3 years, volumes have declined among overall questions about quality and integrity within the VCM and specific scrutiny of some REDD+ projects, but this is still the largest and most liquid project type when looking at all REDD+ credits. The second type of nature-based solution that has been approved has been afforestation, reforestation, revegetation, or ARR. So there's 2 methodologies that have been approved. In December last year, the VM47 methodology has been approved, and in July, just this month, the ACR, afforestation and reforestation of degraded lands methodology, was approved. And we'll have TREAD, who has the first project approved under VM47 speaking, There's also one project under the ACR standard that has already issued credits for afforestation, reforestation under core carbon principles. This is a category that's shown extremely strong demand over the last year. We saw overall that removal credits, of which afforestation, reforestation are the most prevalent type of credits on the market at the moment. Folks who are searching for credits that represent removals of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, that's driving up the price of these by 19% over the last year, even though the actual transaction volume is decreasing. So we see that as just huge demand for every ton of afforestation, reforestation credit that's available on the market, to the point that there's no longer a surplus of these credits available. And so to understand more about this, we conducted a follow-up survey of respondents, and we got 75 responses, which is about the same as what we usually get on our qualitative sentiment survey for the state of BCM. So really pleased with how robust these results have been. Our respondents generally represent the sell side of the market, mostly project developers, brokers, and other intermediaries. We also had some respondents representing credit standards, market researchers, or multilateral organizations. And the bias in our data is towards nature-based solutions. That is in line with our historic position in the market and good contact with forestry and land use project developers, as well as agriculture project developers. We also heard from 24% of respondents that they develop or transact renewable energy credits. That's also not surprising, as that's the second largest category within the BCM. So we asked a bunch of questions, and the first one that we wanted to understand before diving into core carbon principles was what were the biggest bottlenecks for developing and actually selling these credits. Respondents still say that the biggest issue that they're having is a lack of clarity around the ultimate offsetting of emissions using credits, whether that's in a voluntary or compliance context. And so the core carbon principles program could help to provide some clarity by providing a definition of quality and integrity for these credits, although I don't think that this will be sufficient, as buyers will also need guidance on how to buy and retire credits in a manner that is still driving decarbonization within their business. Another bottleneck that stood out was delayed project validation, and that can be related to the standard's ongoing efforts to introduce new methodologies, including ones that are eligible for the core carbon principles. We also asked respondents about the most important factors that they perceive buyers being interested in when they select credits to purchase. And overwhelmingly, we see that it's project-specific attributes, especially project type, but also project geography, project vintage. Then sort of a second tier that we see in terms of what's important is this interoperability and this quality and integrity dimensions, whether that is defined by the credit ratings from these third-party rating agencies that have been established recently, the eligibility for credits in the compliance market, or something that's growing is the importance of core carbon principles approval. We were able to get perspective from our respondents on their intentions to transition existing projects or establish new projects under core carbon principles methodologies. So we had 29 respondents who are considering transitioning their existing project and 18 who are not sure whether they would transition a project. This is an even mix for project transitions between REDD+ and ARR developers. And overall, the respondents who are considering transitioning have an overwhelmingly positive view of the core carbon principles. Something that I want to point out is that this column for not applicable, these are respondents who have projects that don't fall under any of the categories that have been approved for core carbon principles. They still, in the majority, have a positive view of the CCP program. So this is something that overall we saw that the carbon market views as positive, bringing a floor to quality and integrity. And we had similar results from the respondents who intend to register a new project. This was skewed more towards afforestation and reforestation, but 29 respondents said that they were considering establishing a new project, whereas 15 were unsure. And again, we had positive views both in the respondents who do intend to establish a new project and the ones who don't have projects that this applies to. So overall, 63% of our respondents tended to have a positive view of the impact of the Core Carbon Principles program. We had an equal number of respondents considering transitioning to new CCP-approved methodologies for an existing project, and an equal number were considering establishing a new project. But looking beyond the quantitative answers to some of their more unstructured qualitative responses, many respondents stated that the current pace of approvals within the Core Carbon Principles doesn't meet the expectations of the larger VCM. Whether this is because the larger VCM just expects that all project types will be evaluated and assessments will be evaluated right away, or whether that's specific to the project type that they develop within. I think that there's a lot of messaging that can still be done about the early phase of implementation of the Core Carbon Principles program. And as we highlighted, most existing methodologies have not yet been evaluated. So the respondents who develop those specific project types or specific methodologies under those different standards, they're not sure what impact Core Carbon Principles will have on their business. Other respondents indicated that there are other indicators of product quality, such as the specific community benefits, other programs that have been established to document social and environmental benefits. And so for them, Core Carbon Principles is not yet a priority. So we've been seeing a high level of interest in the Core Carbon Principles program and Core Carbon Principles labeled credits, but we're still seeing that there's a lack of clarity on the scope of the program in this initial phase. The methodologies that have been approved for nature-based solutions that I highlighted earlier in this presentation, they have a relatively low volume of credits that are available, but ICVCM is still adding more methodologies and evaluating more programs for eligibility. So we saw that with the recent addition of the ACR afforestation standard over the last month. One key consideration that we see is that ARR projects are already in really high demand as a source of removal credits. And so it's hard to say with the increased prevalence of forward offtake agreements for these projects, how exactly that's going to affect the supply of CCP eligible credits. And finally, we're still looking to see these integrity assessments of other nature-based solutions, including improved forest management and sustainable agriculture. Once we do see more assessments, there's two pathways that we see for this to affect credit price. One is increased demand. So we saw it in the last year with landfill gas that prices increased by 35%, despite no underlying change in the supply of credits. That's just for the credits that were approved for the CCP program. With these nature-based solutions, we could actually have a change in the carbon accounting when they transmit. Or when they transition to a new methodology. And so that could actually decrease the supply of credits that's available in these project types. And that could further push up the price of these credits. So really excited to turn over now to our speakers, and we'll return for a Q&A at the end with all of the speakers together. Now I'll turn it over to Matthew Ashpole from TreeAid, who will speak about their afforestation reforestation project and their journey to embrace carbon credits.
Thanks for all of that. I think it's just important to highlight that there's been a lot of attention and anticipation around core carbon principles, and this is a really meaningful development for the market in terms of de-risking buyer decisions, and really creating a framework to understand quality and integrity for projects. However, the market does need to shift and respond to that. So I think the data that we've been able to collect is really important in helping us to understand not only what the perception is, but some of these initial activities that are taking place and plans from the supply side of the market to respond to these new developments that hopefully help the market grow and mature in the coming years.